The animal law advocacy group Animal Justice Canada has lodged a formal complaint with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency over last week's cull of hundreds of ostriches at Universal Ostrich Farms in British Columbia. The group calls on the director of BC Operations to investigate the cull and to take action to address what it calls inappropriate actions and to prevent similar conduct in the future. Animal Justice says the cull went ahead in spite of a plea to retest the birds to determine their current health status. They also say the method of the cull was contrary to the Federal Criminal Code and BC's Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Joining me now to discuss is Camille Labchuk. She's the Executive Director of Animal Justice Canada. Good morning. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So describe in more detail the complaint that Animal Justice is filing following the cull of those birds last week.
Yeah, so we were deeply concerned to see the methods employed to kill the birds. There's the fundamental question of whether the birds should have been killed a year after they were infected. All indications are that they were very likely healthy, but the CFIA would not retest them. And those actions were further compounded by the way that they killed the birds. So they rounded nearly 400 of the ostriches up into a hay bale pen, and they employed marksmen to shoot them. Now, this is inappropriate for a number of reasons. The CFIA's own manual says it's not a good idea to shoot birds and this should only be a last resort. They point out that ostriches have very small heads. You can imagine marksmen trying to shoot such a hard, small target, especially when the birds would be terrified and running around and watching each other be shot to death, would be not an easy task and certainly not a humane one. There's indications that there were hundreds of shots and that the final round of shots wasn't heard until the next morning, which means some birds were likely alive overnight. The CFIA may have had the lawful authority to carry out this kill, but that doesn't mean that they can engage methods that are cruel when there are less cruel methods available.
So what alternative methods or actions do you think should have been taken instead?
Well, these birds are individuals, and they at least had the right to be treated as individuals when the CFIA was killing them. So the CFIA's manual suggests that one thing to do would be to hood an ostrich to calm the bird down, move the ostrich to a location, and then first administer a sedative and then a lethal dose. And that is something the CFIA itself recommends doing one by one for the birds. Perhaps they didn't want to take the time to do that because there were so many of the birds, but that's no excuse when we're talking about the pain and suffering that these individual animals would have endured. I think that shooting them in front of one another is particularly cruel. And Marcia, in the case of the notorious BC sled dog massacre, I'm sure many viewers remember that, where a man was convicted of criminal animal cruelty for killing off sled dogs who were no longer useful after a business downturn. The fact that he killed them in front of each other was an aggravating feature in his criminal conviction and sentencing. And I would say the same applies here with the ostriches. It is simply cruel.
Camille, have you heard anything back from the CFIA yet?
We haven't heard anything back from the CFIA. I have to say it's troubling that the agency is the body that we must complain to in this case. We've used an internal complaints process that they have. I am hoping that it will be different people reviewing that complaint from the ones who were involved in carrying out the killing. But honestly, it's just so surprising that after considering for a year that they wanted to kill these ostriches and presumably considering how they would do so, they happened to choose probably the least appropriate method possible.
Camille, we'll leave it there for today. I really appreciate your time with us. Camille Labchuk is the Executive Director of Animal Justice Canada. CTV News has reached out to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for comment on the complaint. We're waiting for a response. We'll bring it to you once we get it.